All right. Thanks everyone for joining, and special thanks to Paul. Today, we are lucky to host a discussion with Paul, a long time yak. So definitely someone who's been involved in the community, and I was really happy to see that you were the lead editor for the very first thing that Yak Collective put together. We've done a couple things after that, and that was before my time at the Yak Collective, so we had not crossed paths. But
Yeah.
it was cool to see some of the early work, as well as read your book, read your book, The Pathless Path. So that's definitely something that's been on the radar for a lot of us indies. And with that, over to you, Paul. I think we'd all love to hear a little bit more about your origin, as well as um, what else you've been thinking about around the indie lifestyle.
Yeah. So I just hit my 6 year indie anniversary, which I think one thing more people should do is celebrate those anniversaries. I think actually inspired by people like Venkatesh and Tom Critchlow, who really lean into like writing those annual recaps of indie life. There's so much to learn and share. It's such a weird life. Everyone's flavor is different. And I learn a lot from reading other people's perspectives on these. I think one thing with my book is it's sort of an open ended call for many more people to write their own stories. I hate how to books. Like, here's how you do X. Traditional publishers publish plenty of them, but they're not useful. Um, they might sell books, and I want people to. I want like 100 more versions of like here's how I'm remixing my path and things like that. Um, Yak background, I was involved in that reboot deck, and sort of accidentally got involved, basically because of my consulting skills, I think. And this is something we'll probably talk about today. A lot of people were just throwing ideas in the mix, and I think a big challenge a lot of indie people experience is that they don't have the reps of taking like an unprocessed idea to like a finished, compelling, persuasive idea. And that's something I actually teach people in my business and workshops I do with companies, Strategy U. I love helping people take things from like information to insight, as I call it. And that's a non trivial process. And so my role in Reboot was to basically, I would do one on one calls with people, challenging their ideas, trying to figure out what they're really trying to say, what the key insight was, and like trying to elevate that. And then how do we connect the dots, structure it into different themes and different things like that. Um, so that work can actually be pretty valuable, and a lot of companies need help with that. But I think things like selling that, knowing how to communicate that to clients and things like that, is not super clear. So happy to talk about that if people have questions. My background, I did about 9 years in strategy consulting. I worked at McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, a small firm called A Connect, and then went to work for Russell Reynolds, helping to build out their board advisory consulting practice. By the end, I had become like a pretty solid consultant. Not the greatest, but pretty good, probably above average. Um, but I just didn't like the game of like status seeking, politics, like trying to pretend to care about the latest HBR articles and all that. So my curiosity kind of pulled me toward going out on my own. I went from strategy consultant. I said, all right, I'll become a freelance consultant. My first year and a half, 2 years was mostly doing freelancing. And I did enough to pay the bills and buy myself time to sort of think and wander and explore ideas. In that time, I sort of fell in love with writing, decided I wanted to keep doing that indefinitely, and kept doing it for the last five years more seriously, ending with the publish of my book. My book, The Pathless Path, is basically like a bunch of recipes around like how I made sense of these weird indie paths, in, as some people have said, brutal honesty and raw like failure. So figuring things out as I go, very slowly, fumbling through, figuring things out, sharing other people's recipes and ideas and things like that. I haven't been as involved with the Yak Collective. Um, I find it hard to figure out where to like add value. I think one thing that's a very powerful skill for me is in helping people synthesize ideas. So if people ever need help on that, happy to help. I love doing that kind of stuff. I don't need pay to do that stuff. It's fun for me. But yeah, it's cool to see people still involved. Oh, hello? You hear me now? Oh yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
strange. I could hear everything here, but I guess on the live stream, Anurag.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, I love helping people with synthesizing ideas. If people ever want help with that, either in like writing or slide form or report form, let me know. Love to help people riff on that. Don't need like pay for that or anything. Like doing it for fun.
Yeah, we have to do a lot. It's kind of interesting because Yeah Collective is so distributed. We're going through a similar synthesis exercise in the governance channel right now, and so I'm sure your expertise would come in handy because it's something that as a group we've kind of muddled through, and that's kind of like a general theme for us. Um, Even like indie living, a lot of your writing, as well as like you mentioned Tom's, as well as Venkat's writing, has kind of informed the strategy we have going forward with like how we want to structure and provide support for other indies. So if we ever make a deck, I think it'd be interesting to kind of synthesize some of those learnings from a core
Yeah.
group of us as well as from you as well.
I think the big thing I've realized is that, and I mean, I'm definitely influenced by Venkatesh a lot. If you are going to have an indie sort of life, you need to spend a lot of time working on your inner game and
Mm.
figuring out mentally and psychologically how you're going to make sense of your path. And then you probably need strategies that are counter default, right? You need explicit strategies that are leaning against what the default pull will provide for you, right? The default is aiming at a house. If you're going to do that and doing the indie thing, especially at the beginning, like you're just going to end up frustrated, upset, you're going to harm your relationships and things like that, right? So it's thinking about what are the key things I want to lean against and decide not to pursue explicitly. And then like step 2 is really figuring out what am I actually pursuing, right? For me, it's time freedom. I'm pretty aligned with my wife around that and creative projects. And that means some very explicit choices around like what we do and don't consume at this stage of our life.
Do you feel like that pull for the default path is the strongest during your first year? And I'm kind of channeling the other people in the group as well as my own uh, anxieties around the indie lifestyle. But like, it does feel like in the first year, a lot of people kind of crave the safety of a job again. Did it kind of go away, or does it come in waves? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone for sure. I think what happens in that first year is all these hidden um, forces become explicit, right? And this happened to me. I had been just going from job to job on the default path, and then as soon as I left that, I realized there were all these like implicit assumptions from other people about how life goes, right? People are like, "Oh, you're not working? You don't have a job? What do you mean you're wandering around in the middle of the day on a Tuesday?" Right? And so you realize there are these strong pulls, and you start to feel bad. You're like, am I a bad person? Especially in the US. I think this is different in different countries, but true to some degree. Um, and then the game is really okay. How do I want to react to that tension by leaning back to where I came from? And for some people, that answer is yes. For me, it was like I want to go further. And I think a big thing that helped me was moving abroad and just getting out of like what I had known my whole life. Just to create some space in my life, both in terms of lowering my cost of living to extend my runway and take the pressure off a little more, and also just to be in a different place where the cultural assumptions were different.
Yeah, I can personally relate to moving away because I've ended up in Mexico, Mexico City, and it's actually helping to get some separation both from India, where my cultural center is, and it's similar to America. If you don't have a job in
Yeah.
India, your relatives look at you kind of weird. Um, and so let me throw it over to Daniel. Do you have a question here?
Just basically picking up on his conversation, that thread with sort of expectations of the default pass and feeling that pressure. I think Paul, both you and Venkat have talked about that need for the strong inner game and the sort of psychological defenses and countering that pressure, whether peer pressure from families and questioning that turning your back on a default pass. It's the Venkat has said that he was like factory produced for, right?
Yeah.
Um, and my experience has been a little bit different. I think just because my just like sociocultural upbringing was different. Like I grew up in sort of a lower working middle class neighborhood in Philadelphia. A lot of my friends like didn't all go to college. Ended up in service industry, blue collar work, and just like that sort of base level precarity and like stitching jobs together and sort of like cobbling together different gigs and income streams is like very familiar and like normal. um, so having been on more of like a traditional 9 to 5 career path and then doing some like career changes and like the millennial sabbatical thing for a year, I didn't feel as much of that because like I don't
Yeah.
have as much of that like sociocultural context and baggage. So it's interesting to hear you talk about getting out of that context by going abroad. But I also wonder for a lot of folks, especially like under the API sort of gig workers, I feel like it's probably not that big of a pressure or cultural sort of contrast for them as I hear from some of the other folks who have departed from higher level like career paths. So I'm interested in your thoughts or like experience with that and other folks on their own Pathless paths and things of that sort.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts too, especially from other countries or cultural. So, I actually have a very similar background. My Either of my parents went to college. My dad worked in manufacturing starting when he was 19. Um, and they sort of went from like this low income blue collar, like he sort of climbed the ladder of a corporation to like a managerial type role. So their like experience changed, but like what I grew up with is kind of um normal for me. And it wasn't that weird to leave the path, except all my friends I had acquired by going to college and stuff. That was where I felt weird, like in those social circles in the US cities. Um but yeah, and it's very weird in that like the upper income people are the most like, oh, this is a privilege to quit your job, like, but it's how most people have lived for most of history. And it's very much this like professional middle class that is sort of disconnected from how the world works. And it's a very weird thing. There's this guy that talks about money, I think Jim Grubman, and he talks about migrating to different classes. And it's like migrating to a different country. And for me, getting into strategy consulting and was like migrating to a new country. I didn't know how to speak. I didn't know how to like I didn't know that like politics was such a big deal. I said like the wrong things. I remember when I arrived at McKinsey, I like said something taking John McCain seriously, and people like trounced on me. Like I just didn't know. I didn't know anything about like politics. Um, and you learn all these codes, and then I think leaving for me was like a big relief. It's like, okay, I can get like back to how the world actually works. And I've come to see like unpredictable income as a feature because it like forces me to constantly recommit to this path and be like, am I crazy? Should I take a higher paid job? Um, and things like that. And um, yeah, I think just moving abroad too helped me realize, oh, there's hundreds of different ways to live.
Yeah, it definitely connects us more with like the rest of the world. I really like that point about how um, most of the world has lived like this, and not in a paycheck to paycheck way, but in a variable income state. Like that's how we've been for
Yeah,
a
but
long
it's
time.
like trying to make it work. Like
Yeah.
everyone's like grandparent had a life like that. um, the rare grandparent, like now, of people, had like a 40-year career at a big company. Um, my grandfather dropped out of school in fourth grade to work on a farm. His mother died, and his uncle like physically abused him. Like it was a much harder life than what we're
Mm.
dealing with today.
Yeah, at least like culturally from India, 2 generations ago was just the beginning of the rise. Like we had just achieved independence, and my grandfather got a both my grandfathers were in government jobs, but they were like career men. And when you look back one more generation, it was like complete poverty because most of India was like they were literally migrating from the villages. So I it's when you look back, like my grandfather definitely thinks what I'm doing right now is crazy because the goal was stability, right? Like
Yeah.
you they fought to get college educated, get a government job for the stability, and the fact that I would give up a high paying corporate career is like anathema. But I think his father might have understood, or that would have made sense to him. Um,
I
so
don't have one thing I'm thinking about is that I think because of mass media and movies and how easy it is to share stories and how hypercharged they are these days, like these stories are much stickier than they were in the past. Like 100 years ago, you would just look around to your community and see what other people are doing and try to figure your life out. Now we have stories about what you should do with your life. And I sense there's more of a lag than we realize. Like,
mm,
like our stories about how we should think about work and life are lagging what the reality is. I think people that dip into the indie world realize not only can you do this, it's actually an interesting way to live and might actually be more upsides over the long term. And we just don't have the story around it because everyone has their own path. So there
yeah.
really can be no collective story. Um, so it's very hard. Like you're not gonna have like our path celebrated in movies, and people aren't gonna be like, "Oh, that's the indie man," right? We know what the career man looks like because there were tens, hundreds of millions globally, if not billions. We have no idea what the indie man does.
When you look at kind of the last 6 months to a year of when you had a paycheck, Paul, and I think this is like particularly interesting for a group of folks on this call because there are some people still on the fence about like should we jump, should we kind of stay put. Um, what was kind of what kind of inner game things did you end up doing to either uh, I don't know, level set your expectations when you did make the jump? Um, did you do anything that made things easier to actually convert
No.
to full-time indie, or do you feel like you did anything that made it more difficult?
Yeah, the only thing I did useful was actually just be in the consulting world already so that
Mm,
I had some confidence I knew how to do consulting esque work. Everything else, I was totally underprepared. People think from the outside, oh, you worked at these impressive companies, you were ready. I left without a plan. I had talked to people about working as an indie consultant. I had started reaching out to like small consulting firms looking for gigs. I had to learn so much. I think my final year, I was really self sabotaging my own life. Like I was becoming miserable at work. And it's very clear I was headed toward this path. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know people on this path. Um, I hadn't built friends doing weird paths. Um, I should have done more. I started reaching out. I started signing up for like talent platforms and making casual inquiries or to like people that might be looking for work. Um, but everything that turned into a gig in my first year was after I left my job. And I used that like insecurity and anxiety to drive me to massive action. Um, so I think you can prepare way better these days. There's also like the ecosystems like Yak and more people sharing stuff. Like Tom Critchlow's writing is amazing. The Art of Gig, obviously. Um, like all these talent platforms, things like that. But I totally missed the inner game part. I didn't even think about it. I was just so in the matrix of going through the motions of my life. I didn't realize how hard it would be. Um, my first 3 years, like I was getting through it, but like man, it took a lot of self reflection, and I think what I did in terms of not really pursuing maximizing gigs or income or anything, like my freelance income was highest the first year, then it went down the next 2 years. My third year, I made 20 grand after self employment taxes. I was just creating space in my life to do all that inner work, thinking, writing about what the hell I was doing, and trying to lay the groundwork for a new chapter. So, yeah, I would say try try to do more than I did.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the themes I picked up from Art of Gig was build up some sort of for Venkat, it was Ribbon Farm. It was like some sort of lead generation, some sort of investment that will help you. But the more I've talked to people, I don't know if this is your experience as well, Paul, the more I'm realizing it's very rare for someone to have built up something to like land back on when they leave the
It's
full-time
hard.
work. Yeah, it feels like people are kind of making it up as we go along in this first couple years.
I don't have side gig energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Same.
you see all these hustle bros talking about side gigs and stuff. Like I never had the energy. Like my full time job was zapping all my energy. And though at the same time I was like writing on Quora, but I never saw it as something that would help me later. It's very obvious now I liked writing. I had no awareness of this in the moment. It was just like something I did for fun, I thought.
Yeah. I guess now looking back, you can connect the dots, but
Yeah.
it was tough to like ladder that up into some sort of like reasonable income generating strategy back then.
And it's never clear what you'll end up earning money doing. Like your interests are going to change over time. This is the hardest
Hmm.
thing with indie life is um yeah, I did some. Let me see if I can pull this up. Uh, yeah. So one of the pitfalls of freelancing is that I'll share the second screen. Um, so one of the pitfalls is it sharing?
I
Oh,
can
it's this
see
the
it.
preview.
I can see it, but it might affect the live stream. But
Oh, okay.
I think it's okay,
Sorry.
Anuraj. We can. I think it's okay to have something that's just for the live audience.
What's that? I can, yeah. Yeah, let me get the link for you. Basically, it's um you're not a business. You're a human, right? And I think a lot of our impulses are to um turn ourselves into a business. There's all this thinking around like I need to create like my consulting landing page, and it starts at pitfall number 2. Thinking like it's this mass media mindset that's like I need to please everyone. I need to reach the mass market. It's like you're not KPMG advertising at the airport. Right? This very vague messaging, like these high level themes. Um, and then people create these websites. It's like I do strategic management, financial management, IT. It's like, no, like you need to be a specific person that can serve that person you're talking to's need, right? I'm the best person to help you launch a generic oncology drug in the US market. That's like one thing somebody can do. So, like, really figuring that out is hard. But at the same time, you want to constantly be A B testing this, right? Try different things out. Right? Like I said at the beginning, I am somebody that can help you turn information on a slide into something that's compelling and persuasive. Reports, PowerPoint, and things like that. Right? It's very specific. So in your head, you're imagining, oh, I could see something I've done around that where Paul could be useful and helpful. But that's it. That's the only thing I'm volunteering for in this context. Right? It might be different in a different context. Um, and there's this idea from David Fields, who's a pretty good follow, has a lot of ideas around indie consulting. He calls it your fishing line, right? And you're putting these triggers into the world such that you're getting a response. The biggest challenge when you're an indie consultant is you don't want to be legible. You left the default path. You left the
Mm.
corporate world. You don't want to be Mr. Job title, right? But you actually do need to be legible to engage in the work you want to do, right? Which feels uncomfortable, but it's just like, especially at the beginning, you have to do it, right? Like, another way you can do it is through writing. Just write about things you're deeply interested in, put it out there, and then use that as a clue to send something to people, right? Um,
I- and just one thing about writing, do you feel like that's the primary mode for a specific type of indie, or do you kind of think of it as almost table stakes, like just to work through the inner game and get through being like an illegible self at the beginning? Do you feel like writing is almost table stakes? Um, I know a lot of us struggle with daily, weekly habits of writing, like it doesn't come naturally. And for those indies where it doesn't come naturally, do you have any recommendations?
right. So the thing is, like, I'm not good at shoulds. You shouldn't do the shoulds. You should do the
Mm.
must. I must write about this. I must talk about this. I must explore this topic. One article that is deeply thoughtful about a topic you care about is more valuable than like a weekly rhythm about stuff you don't really care about. Right.
Like that, yeah.
And even still, like SEO is underrated. I have this article about Edgar Schein and culture. I have like 50,000 lifetime views on this article. Now, I'm not really pursuing stuff in this domain for consulting, but I've had other things like this happen. I did this long article about freelance talent platforms. I think if you Google freelance talent platforms, it might still be one of the top articles.
Let's see.
Yeah, I think the platforms are out competing me now.
Yeah, top all they all have like the top 20 freelance websites.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So
The Talent Platform Archives or the Freelance Talent Markets Archive?
yeah, so if you search like freelance talent platforms for consultants, I have like this ultimate guide to freelance strategy consulting. I'm like number 3 on Google, and I get like steady traffic on this. And it's just an outline of the talent platforms. And I just thought it was interesting to write about at the beginning. I have like tens of thousands of reviews on this. I only wrote it to like help other people with. And then I ended up writing this essay called The Failed Promise of Talent Platforms as a user. And it ended up getting shared in these talent platforms. The CEO of Catalent reached out to me just to talk about it. The CEOs of like 3 other talent platforms reached out to me because they liked my ideas. So yeah, I'll drop this in the chat. I don't know where the chat went. Was there a
Yeah,
voice meta? Did it disappear?
it wasn't in voice meta. It should, if you share it in voice meta, I'll put it back into the actual channel.
Yes. Yeah, so
Yeah, and Daniel's tagged you in it too. So
and spending 50 hours on one article that you actually care about might be more valuable than spending a year writing every week. And this is just something that doesn't get talked about anymore because we see what other people are doing. How people do Twitter threads. Twitter
yeah,
threads are fine, but they're very ephemeral. Um, and I think it's very easy to signal competence in writing, right? And if you're not going to do writing, you need to figure out some other way. You actually don't need a web presence at all to be an indie consultant. I think a lot of it is a distraction. You'd probably be better just like emailing 25 of your friends and saying, "Hey, I'm an indie consultant now. People want to help you. I'm an indie consultant now. Here are the 2 things I'm looking to do. Help these people with this, help these people with that. You have any people I should talk to?" That's it. And you can kickstart a consulting practice doing that. And then over time, a lot of what I do is just if I don't like doing a certain kind of work, I don't do it again. And I keep basically evolving by eliminating the stuff I don't like doing over time. Now, all I do for consulting is training around consulting skills for knowledge professionals and small and medium sized consulting firms. That's like the only work I'm willing to do now. That took 4 years of A/B testing, trial and error, and building out stuff around that.
yeah. I really like your point earlier about because we're human and we're not companies. You're not A/B testing the market necessarily. You're like A/B testing yourself to figure
Yeah,
out what
exactly.
work you want to keep pursuing.
Yeah, it's hard. The challenge with this is, right, you have a life and you're trying to make money and you're trying to balance that with the long game, and that's why these paths are crazy and hard. But it ultimately leads to a more interesting life. I think if you can follow your curiosity and keep that alive, it leads to actually much more interesting and marketable skills in the world. Um, but you're definitely gonna have ups and downs, and it's gonna be hard, and you're gonna have to like stick it out during those down stretches.
Yeah, and I can kind of Jenna's story in this particular area has been really helpful. I know to me
Yeah.
particularly, but other indies as well, where um, I I think you've shared this before, Jenna, but how you have like long-term clients, the web presence and like all this like posting weekly has never really appealed. Um, but yeah, I love the recognition that it's also possible to do with just emailing your friends and trying to bootstrap a consultancy that way.
Most most indie consultants, and I mean, feel free to add on, Jenna. Most indie consultants I know are former strategy consultants and don't spend any time on the internet. They might post on LinkedIn. They don't have podcasts. Some of them have newsletters. Most do not. They just work through their network and like work directly with like people at big companies.
Yeah, allow me
Yeah.
just to say that I had a couple of important moments really early on when I went out, which is running into somebody like what you just described, Paul. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you want to own your domain, your name as a domain? She's like, are you kidding? You know, this complete other thing of wanting to, she might not have called it stealth mode, but she might have. She had some very technical expertise. I always wish I could remember what her thing was, but she had all the clients she could stand turning stuff away, you know, like her reputation was all she needed and her existing network. And I always think about this with, you know, the big three will call it for the Yak community, which is you, Tom, and Venkat, that selection bias, you know, like you guys are good at writing. It works for you. It lures us all into thinking that we should do it too. And I love this interplay you guys are having. Like, it's obviously a one great way to go, but what are the other ways that could work for people, which is what, you know, you're kind of on now.
Yeah, it's total selection bias. This works for me because I have to be this way.
Yeah.
I have to spend my time writing in an unpaid fashion for a ridiculous amount of hours. And I have more profitable avenues I could structure my life. It has only recently started to look impressive in terms of financial outcomes in my 5th and 6th year. But it's only worked because like I am having a ton of fun doing this. Like writing, I love it. Writing is
Yeah.
above consulting for me, right? Writing is not, writing is a higher order work for me. That is what I love doing. That's why I consult. I consult so that I can write.
Yeah, Kieran and I have talked about watching Venkat's output. Just wondering, like, well, really, how does he do it? He finally hit a wall right now with his move, but his ability to do, you know, his work plus his newsletters plus Ribbon Farm, et cetera, it's always been clearly something he's well adapted to. It's not a fight, a struggle for him. It sounds like that's true. Where you are too.
He's probably earning about 10% of what he could earn.
Well, part
Maybe
of why I'm,
even
you know,
smaller
yes and
amount.
no. You know, I think you, me, and Venkat, and probably everyone on the call are in some fundamental way unsuited to the normal work
Yeah.
world. Like,
Sure.
I'm not sure if I chose to leave. I think I just never would have survived. And it sounds like you were, you know, you could fake it for quite a while and you learned a lot, but you were never going to survive being there. It's
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
was
hearing.
fried at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the thing is over the long term, like Venkat probably can't make 3 million a year consulting. He could do it for 6 months, but he probably senses, oh, I'd burn out or I just like I wouldn't feel good about it. That's how I am. I sort of I know there's these things called project management offices or program management offices in big companies. And you can get gigs staffed 5 days a week, making like $1,500 a day doing this
Mm.
kind of work. It is that is like break in case of fire. I will pursue one of those. My goal is to go the rest of my life without having to do one of those. But like I'm not stupid or naive. Like I do have a daughter now. I'm married. Um, I'm happy to do that if we need to do it. But I don't want to do it. That work is the worst.
Yeah. Well, I think of, you know, everywhere, I've now lost it, everything everywhere all at once. That whole idea of the Chinese immigrant, that particular
Yeah.
tradition of working to take care of your kids is, you know, we can honor that while not hoping that it doesn't happen to us, right?
Yeah, and I think so. One interesting thing, if you guys open that deck I shared too, there's this idea of packages. And this is one thing I've slide 30. idea of packages, making it legible, like creating offers that are out in the world. I think if you do have a web presence, doing this can be really interesting and a good way of segmenting different types of people that are going to use you. Right? I think people totally underappreciate that big companies are willing to spend a lot of money on people doing things with specific knowledge that they have to offer. Right? So I love this idea. This is a ConvertKit consultant. He does 350 one time. That's just for probably like one-off creators. He does 2,000 for a day. Maybe that's a creator making a little more money. Then he does these like $5,000 engagements. What he's signaling with the $5,000 engagements is that, hey, I'm serious. I do work with companies that spend a lot of money and I know how to work with you. Right? Oftentimes, when people are charging too little to corporates or big companies, it's a signal of you don't understand the market and you don't believe in your skills and you're not competent enough to work with companies. Which is
Yeah.
amazing news for us. So it's like if you're going to engage with like a Fortune 500 company, you should be charging more than you're comfortable with.
More than that, actually. I was just going to say, from a product point of view, like if you
Sorry,
picked up a
one
brand
second.
new,
You're breaking
I
up
don't
a
know if
little.
anyone else can hear, but yeah, Herschel, it's breaking up quite a bit.
uh, if-
Why don't you try again?
that better?
Otherwise, you can like type out the question.
Yeah, I'll type out the question in voice chat.
There you go.
No, this sounds good now.
Working now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't it more than that? Because if you can, like, pick up a Lamborghini for like $10,000, like, there's a
Right.
reason that Lamborghini priced their cars at $100,000 plus, and that there's also like, because at the end of the day, the people making the decisions, they're still people. So if you're actually undervaluing your service that you're providing to a big company, the people on the other side are going to think that you're not bringing enough value to the table.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. The thing I would add is raise prices is sort of empty advice. I think raise prices in line with your own ambition, right? Raising prices is a way to level yourself up, but you don't actually want to do it too far. Like if you've never worked with a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you don't want to sell a $250,000 project to them because it'll be so scary and stressful. Right? You want to like ladder up to like slightly beyond your comfort zone and keep building. If you want to work with corporates, right? I think there's always trade-offs, but you can and it's all about making it legible. Like I do these virtual trainings. I basically do what's I think many of you might know what like a cohort-based course is. I do cohort-based courses with corporates. So I run corporates through this 4-week cohort-based course. I facilitate the whole thing. I do assignments. I do all these sessions. But I do not call it a cohort-based course. That's not their language. That's not what they budget for. They budget for trainings or workshops. Trainings or workshops are something they purchase. They do not buy cohort-based courses. They have no idea what that is. The person who's buying my service can't sell that to his boss. He'll look like a moron to his boss. Right? So you need to give people the legible clues that make them look smart inside their organization too if you're selling to big companies.
Can you say a little bit, Paul, about this idea of big companies and therefore are able to pitch to them whether you like doing it or not versus targeting other sizes? I'd be curious to hear a little more.
Yeah, I mean, big companies are painful. Sometimes they have like these 6-month sales processes. I try to opt out of that as much as possible. What I've done is I have this website where I have here are my corporate workshops and my prices. I just share my prices So I'll share the link. And then as you'll see, there's now a form people have to submit. So they click through and it says share your details in a call. And I say, what are you looking for? And then here's my pricing, starting pricing. Are you comfortable with these? And then they can book a call with me after that. So for some companies, they're just not going to do this, right? Some companies are used to the song and dance. They want to jump on 4 scoping calls before they do an agreement, right? So I just try to go async. I probably lose work by doing this. But me, I just can't do a lot of this kind of stuff. It drains me. Um, it's like I do project X this way at this price. Um, and a lot of companies are used to being like fawned over and, oh, we'll adjust our scope, we'll adjust our pricing. It's like, I just don't do any of that. So I probably miss out on a lot. So that's where like writing online and like sharing approach and stories is helpful for me. But yeah, that's how I approach it now. That was a learned process over time, though.
When
My
you've got
first,
some great signals with the BCG, being able to put McKinsey BCG right up front, you'll be able to
yeah,
ride that for the rest of your life, as a credentialing, essential credentialing. Well
for
done.
that specific stuff, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
That
yeah, right.
training
For
that
that
matters,
website.
right?
Mhm.
For other like more experimental consulting, it's not that valuable. For like small firms in the tech world, it's not that legible or useful.
Have you found it actually like a turn off? You need to
Yeah,
disappear it sometimes?
it can be a turnoff. Yeah, because it's like, oh, this person's not hands on. So I'd need to, like, with smaller and medium sized firms, I actually need to demonstrate that I'm a hands on person.
Mm.
Right? Big Fortune 500 companies might care about the credential and like, oh, it's so impressive. Um, but the companies I want to work for, I need to actually demonstrate that I'm hands on. So what I'll do with them is like start sending them stuff fast. I act fast. I send stuff. I engage. I reply quickly. And I start working on things with them as a way to sort of practice that collaboration. 'Cause, yeah.
Are you at this point trying to work with smaller companies, or are you like at a nice steady state with the types of companies you're working with?
I'm very reactive to the stuff that comes in. So, like, I have a
I
small
see.
YouTube channel for this brand, and people that come via SEO traffic on some of the articles I wrote, and like people reach out to me. It's mostly been like small and medium sized consulting firms and um, like data and insight groups of big companies. And for the most part, it's been pretty easy to either get people to pay invoices immediately or pay on credit card. But yeah, that's who I'm working with.
Okay, very cool.
It's all over the place. So I just did a 2 cohorts with an Indonesian company. I've worked with um, a consulting firm in Abu Dhabi. I've worked with one in Dubai. I've worked with one in the UK. I've done multiple trainings with companies in the US. Um, yeah, Canada. It's been all over the place, which has been pretty interesting. Yeah, this website. Yeah, I have enough stuff published that people are finding me.
When you say this website, Paul, which one do you consider to be like the center piece
Oh,
of your?
strategyu.co.
Okay, that it is that one. Got it.
Yeah.
That the book writing the boundless.
Yeah,
It's cool.
so
It feels like you've diligently separated those two out. Like there's
Yeah.
not a lot of cross linkages.
yeah, it doesn't really I had it together my first couple of years, I was like writing these consulting articles, and they were like my most searched and most traffic on my website. And I launched this consulting course, and it didn't sell anything for like 9 months. So somebody convinced me to spin everything out and put it under this brand. Um, and that's when that started to take off. And so I've always just like tinkered on that slowly. That's where the majority of my income came from in years 2 to 5. And things are only now starting to shift to like the boundless, pathless path stuff, only in the last year. But all of my attention has been on like the free, unpaid stuff. Like that's the reason I do the consulting work. I try to price high and do it as little as possible, just to like fund a minimum viable life to like write about the things I care about and like do all the other things. I'm sort of shocked that like I'm actually making money from a book. It's so crazy to me. And I didn't plan on it, and I don't even care if it goes to zero because I'm gonna keep writing, and now I just have more runway to do it.
It's a great book, Paul, and I think it like
Thanks.
speaks for itself. And I really like the idea you had at the beginning where it's like you kind of seeded the conversation so more people write similar books. So it's not
Yeah.
a how-to on being an indie, it's sharing your specific journey. And that's a book idea for all of us, I guess. Like once we kind of can connect the dots back, uh, turn it into a book. I kind of I kind of wish resumes were almost like that, right? Like telling a narrative
Yeah.
story of like how you got to where you are now. It kind of makes you more invested in a person when you understand the challenges they've overcome as well as uh, how they've synthesized their prior experiences into being someone that can help you with your current problem. I think that a lot of I hope a lot more people do that too.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how interesting their lives are. Just
Yeah.
not having a full-time job makes you very interesting, and there are tons of people living unconventional paths. Even people in full-time work are on unconventional paths, right? And there honestly isn't that much sharing um about this stuff. Like literally just write about like how did you spend your day today. The number of people waking up for in a Discord about like indie ideas is so rare and so unique and interesting. Like that would be enough for like something that's fascinating to other people.
Yeah,
In the
definitely a lot of people thinking about it. Sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
I'm kind of the tools nerd, and I suspect you didn't agonize over what stack to put your business on. And I bet you can, like what to use for accounting, for invoicing. Do you want to do it like a 1 minute riff? Or
Yeah,
did
yeah.
you agonize? Like, did you in
Oh,
fact agonize over how the hell?
I always look for like what's the slowest, dumbest solution I can use to just get going. I did QuickBooks Self-Employed, which is actually amazing in the U.S. For several years, and I did my own taxes. I used Zoom. I didn't really use many other tools in the first few years. I'm pretty
And are
good
you a
with tech
PowerPoint?
though.
Are you a
Yeah.
PowerPoint or a Keynote guy?
No, I mean I'm PowerPoint. From
Yeah,
I'm from the consulting world. I still
right.
use
And
PowerPoint.
Word and Excel, right?
Wrote my book in Microsoft Word. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I use Excel and PowerPoint. I, I don't really overthink most of this stuff.
right. That was what I was gonna guess, but it was good to check. Get it, get it done, get to the actual work instead of thinking about tools all the time.
Yeah, the reason I switched to Substack is I was on MailChimp before that, and I just like Substack because I could get to writing words in less than 10 seconds. Um, and that's why I've
Mm,
stayed. I don't think about that decision. Maybe I'll analyze it once a year for like a minute, but usually the decision is like stay the course. And I actually think that's an interesting framework, which is like people always think the decision is to like do something or don't do something or don't do something. there's always a third choice of like wait and see, get more information. Um, and that's usually the strategy for me on my path generally. It's like wait and see.
Oh, not deciding is a decision,
Just
Yeah.
revert.
and
Yeah,
which can be useful.
postpone.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to be cognizant of time. We have a couple minutes left. Um, maybe we have time for one more question. Otherwise, I wanted to give you some time to like plug anything you're thinking about, or you know, the I don't know if you're currently promoting something else that you think people in this audience might be interested in, Paul. This is a great time to do that. Um, and then yeah, I would love to. I know we would love it if we could involve you in more indie accelerator things in the future. So we'll definitely keep you in the loop and hopefully have you back again at another time.
Yeah, happy to help with anything. Back. I just dropped a link to my book if people want it. I gift it to anyone that asks. There's the PDF. Um, I yeah, I'm not really promoting anything. This is part of like the flow of my life. I love conversations. Conversations inspire ideas for me, challenging me to think and like help me figure out what the heck I'm doing on my path. It's 6 years into the path, but I still have self doubt. I worry about money, in unpredictability, probably less so than 3 years ago when I was making 20 grand. But yeah, I still worry about these things. Always looking for other people on similar paths to learn from. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to. I have time. I can stick around for more questions. Yeah, email me, DM me. Always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Again, I want to reiterate that you are definitely one of our inspirations at Indie Accelerator to kind of just get this thing going. And as a group, we kind of uh, allow me to plug Indie Accelerator really quick. We are kind of a group of people who are either in the paycheck world but just have one foot out the door, or who have kind of transitioned to gig work uh, recently enough that it's still challenging, or a couple of us have been indies for a while and are looking at how to reframe indie life so that it's either more satisfying, less hours, more freedom, that kind of thing. So just a group of people who are interested in pushing forward the whole indie vibe that we've got going. Um, and yeah, a lot of your work has. I think we read one of your articles in the first couple weeks. I'm struggling to remember which one, but we've definitely read. We read one of them, and then I think Pathless Path is going to be on the roadmap for us as well. So yeah, if there are any more questions, uh, yeah, I can stick around as well. But otherwise, we can wrap up and meet up another time and meet up next week. I think because we're reading Art of Gig, chapter 8, something like that.
Nice.
I think it's kind of cool that you were reading Art of Gig when it was still the newsletter. So I remember
Oh yeah.
looking it up and it
I was
was
so
not,
hungry for that information.
yeah.
Mm.
Is there anything that you think has changed since like that initial newsletter to now the book to like where we're at in the indie kind of timeline? Have things kind of gone slower than you expected with more people kind of exiting the workforce, or have they gone faster because of COVID?
I think, I think the media narratives are usually nonsense around this stuff. I think it's a slow and steady drip of more and more people.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, there's a lot of people that like were indie curious, leaving like big tech in like 2021, but like they're all back employed already.
Yeah.
Like
It,
you can just tell it's a different energy. Like the long-term indies are like we have to be doing this. We have no other choice. And it will
Yeah, that's
change. You'll get more people that are trying to like. I mean, you do have the types that are like, "Oh, quit consulting and double your salary." It's like, okay, yeah, it's a path, but like usually not what a lot of people in this ecosystem are looking for.
yeah, that's true. I feel like Venkat once in a while, maybe every quarter, he'll post something about how it's easier in the paycheck world, and we all kind of laugh at it. Um, I, I personally, I don't know if this is gonna resonate with anyone, but like I feel like I might be one of those like indie surfers who may take full-time job just because my consulting practice is very slow. In that I don't change clients that often. I have like one or two really solid clients that were either my old like friends or ex-founders, and we kind of work together. And it feels like I don't feel too disingenuous dropping back in and dropping out, but I love this option of like dropping out of the 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 career path. And um, it is tough, I think, narratively to like justify it, but if you can, I feel like I've been able to do it enough for myself that I wouldn't mind going back to work at like a paycheck world for a couple of years, but there has to be like some goal in mind. Like there has to be something I'm like trying to do with it. Just doing it for the sake of it was not cutting it, and I think that was definitely a portion of burnout before I dropped out of just like pure paycheck world.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
Daniel had a
one thing
question
one
there.
thing
Oh,
that
sorry,
has
go ahead.
changed is like the default world has become more compatible with an indie lifestyle. Like they're more open to remote work now, which is a game
Yeah,
changer. Um, remote work is a completely different experience from like a full-time office job. Um, and I think companies are more open to flexible work arrangements. So you can go in with more leverage of saying, I will work 3 days remotely. And they're like, no, we need 5 days in the office. And you're like, okay, fine, not interested. But like some companies are totally fine with that.
yeah, and even like flexible, like part-time work arrangements are more
Yeah.
common now. 3 days of work a week. I've actually been interested in Daniel's line of thinking too. So he posted a question about collaborative indie work, indie collectives, and he's been kind of following this thread in Yak Collective. So the question, Paul, is kind of like, do you see indies forming, higher level collectives? Like Yak Collective doesn't really, we don't really work on like consulting projects that
Yeah.
often. Um, but yeah, what are your thoughts on collaborative indie work?
Yeah, I think the thing is like indie is inherently indie. We're all selfishly optimizing for our own weird interests and preference for not having a boss, which is naturally not good for like organizing. I think Venkat's chapter on the clutch class basically showing with that like we're inherently selfish individuals. We're not going to organize and unionize, mostly because we don't want to be part of anything. Um, it's just very hard. Um, for years, I've been like talking with other indie consultants, like we should work together. We never do. Uh, maybe there'll be some sort of like payments infrastructure or organizing, or I think like governance and payments infrastructure and like a lot of really boring backend stuff could make this a lot easier. But yeah, it's just still very hard and very human, laborious work.
Yeah, that's part of my question is if that's your sense that it's a sort of infrastructure and frameworks and protocols and sort of like
Yeah.
practices versus just an inherent lack of motivation or desire for, because I think a lot of us that went independent do so because like you said, we sort of have a stubborn independent streak and want to do our own thing. But I think a lot of us also miss the teamwork aspects of work. I've heard a lot of folks talk about that, of like traditional past jobs. Um, and just like it's nice to have a support network where if like my lead gen is slow from some period of time, someone else in the network has something coming in and they need some help and we can pull each other in, and it's not just onerous administratively and subcontracts and the payment um, infrastructure and all of that. And yeah, I think even Venkat might call it like fourth wave consulting or fifth wave, and he's like admittedly dubious of it because he's like a hardcore like Gen X third waver. But yeah, Collective was like initially at least an experiment in that. And there's folks like Other Internet who did the Squad Wealth piece, advocating for this kind of thing. And a lot of Web3 is like all around kind of decentralized coordination um, or
Yeah,
like
we actually tried to start a DAO at Yak Collective last year, I believe, or 2 years ago. I don't know if you were there during that, Daniel. Like, did you see
no.
the token we released and everything?
I saw a
Um,
bit of it retrospectively, but I wasn't around at the time.
yeah, it was cool. Like, we tried for a couple weeks. We ended up not. I don't think we accomplished much in that we had like a board with like tasks and like token values, and it just became too laborious. I don't know if there's anyone else on the call who kind of remembers what happened. I don't know, were you there? I feel like I mean, you were definitely at Yak Collective, but I don't know if you were part of the governance. Back then, it was called like the blockchain study track. Yeah,
I think that's
we
typical of
experimented with
most
like a
DAOs
governance
experiments
token
from what
as
I
well
see.
as like a currency. And so, yeah, they didn't really go. I think the infrastructure just wasn't there, but I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
but
think
if we're,
yeah, I think the nature too is like the kinds of work. Like if you're organizing around work problems, right? And problems that are commoditized and easy to understand, the price goes down rapidly. Right. So if you're doing higher value work, those problems are ambiguous and need to be scoped. So a lot of indie consulting is a scoping problem, right? Which scoping is hard, challenging work that requires judgment, right? And doing that with multiple people is really hard.
yeah, but it's almost like above the API combined
Yeah.
with below the API work, right? Because you would have like one or two people who get to do the challenging, fun work of scoping and like breaking down the problem, and then you just have a bunch of like API gig workers potentially going and picking up the work. At least in my own practice, I find that the scoping work is maybe 30-40% of my time, and I actually grab like I'll do the dirty work necessary for clients, like if we need to actually go and like design something or work through like landing page copy. uh but maybe that's not the general indie theme. Like maybe it's trying to level up so that you're constantly doing the more like cerebral things. Like I think the end goal of you're only doing sparring sessions and generating email notes is like completely cerebral. You're not really touching the like the
Yeah.
design model.
Yeah.
Level
Definitely.
like
Yeah,
your software developer team, your product team, you've got a designer, a data person. I mean, like my work is primarily data engineering and data analysis and like data science sorts of applications. And then I often need some developer help or maybe like design help on something. It's rarely like a consulting idea project, which is probably harder to do collaboratively regularly.
yeah. Um, well, Paul, this was awesome. I'm really glad we got to discuss a lot of the Pathless Path stuff, as well as I think we focused a lot on Art at Gig. Thanks for joining, everyone else, and we'll if you're ever interested, feel free to jump in, anyone, to the reading sessions we do every week. I post a chapter of Art of Gig, and it's a really informal discussion. Like if you can't make the real time discussion, I know a couple weeks I've just read the chapter and just kind of posted notes in the thread. So if you want to participate in reading Art of Gig, join us. And if you want to participate in like future sessions like this, just follow the events and we'll keep them coming. Thanks. Thanks everyone.
Oh,
Thanks.
Did you miss
just
the
saw
audio,
the
Paul?
other channel.